Most people believe retirement risk comes from one place: the stock market. They watch the headlines. They worry about crashes. They assume that once they stop working, market downturns become the biggest threat to their future. But for retirees, the market isn't just something that goes up and down. It behaves very differently than it does for people who are still working. And that difference quietly changes everything. When you're working, a market crash is unpleasant, but temporary. You're still earning income. You're still contributing. Time works in your favor. When you're retired, the same market decline can feel personal, not because the drop is larger, but because the context is different. Retirees don't just own investments. They depend on them. That dependency turns normal market movement into emotional stress. I've met many retirees who were calm investors for decades. They stayed invested through recessions. They ignored noise. They trusted the long term. Then retirement arrived, and suddenly every market dip felt heavier, not because they lost confidence in markets, but because markets were now tied directly to their lifestyle. A downturn no longer meant wait it out. It meant this affects my income. This is why market crashes hurt retirees more than workers. The pain isn't only financial, it's psychological. Withdrawals change how losses behave. When someone is still working, a market decline is often followed by new contributions. That helps recovery. But when withdrawals are happening at the same time as losses, the math changes. Money that leaves the portfolio during a downturn doesn't get the chance to recover. Those dollars are gone forever. This is known as sequence risk, and it's one of the most misunderstood dangers in retirement. Two investors can experience the same average return over time. But if one experiences losses early in retirement while withdrawing, the outcome can be dramatically worse. Not because of bad investing, but because timing matters more when income depends on assets. This is what makes retirees feel vulnerable during market crashes. They're not just watching numbers fall, they're watching future flexibility disappear. Another reason crashes hurt retirees more is lack of recovery time. Workers can afford to wait. Retirees don't always have that luxury. Expenses don't pause during downturns. Bills still arrive. Healthcare costs still rise. Life continues. So even if markets eventually recover, retirees may have already locked in losses through withdrawals. That creates a lingering sense of damage. Even after the market rebounds, confidence often doesn't. There's also the issue of emotional fatigue. Retirees are exposed to market movement differently. They may check accounts more often. They may feel pressure to react. They may question decisions they were once comfortable with. This constant mental load is exhausting. It erodes enjoyment, and it often leads to overly conservative choices at the wrong time. I've seen retirees sell after a downturn not because they panic easily, but because they're tired. Tired of worrying, tired of uncertainty, tired of feeling like their future is tied to daily headlines. That emotional response can be more damaging than the market decline itself. Another overlooked factor is income replacement. Workers know that paychecks will arrive regardless of market conditions. Retirees don't have that certainty. If investments are the primary income source, a market crash feels like a pay cut. And unlike a job, there's no clear path to earning more to make up the difference. That loss of perceived control amplifies fear. This is why some retirees say market volatility feels worse than they expected. They assumed they were prepared. They had diversified. They had balanced portfolios. They had professional advice. What they weren't prepared for was how it would feel. This emotional unpreparedness is more common than most people realize. During working years, volatility is intellectual. You read about it. You acknowledge it exists. You accept that markets fluctuate. But experiencing volatility, while depending on those same assets, is fundamentally different. It shifts from abstract to immediate, from distant to personal. That shift catches many retirees off guard. They thought understanding risk meant they could handle it. But knowing something intellectually and living through it emotionally are two separate experiences. This is also why retirees with stable income sources often weather crashes better. Not because their investments don't fall, but because their lifestyle isn't directly threatened. When core expenses are covered by predictable income, market movement becomes background noise. It's still unpleasant, but it's not destabilizing. This separation between daily life and market performance is critical. Without it, retirees experience every downturn as a personal event. With it, volatility becomes manageable. Another challenge is that market crashes often coincide with other stressors: health issues, family responsibilities, rising costs. These pressures compound emotional strain. A worker facing a downturn may still feel optimistic about the future. A retiree may feel boxed in. That emotional environment changes decision-making. This is why some retirees regret how they reacted to past crashes. Not because they made irrational choices, but because fear narrowed their options. When you're already feeling vulnerable about one thing, market volatility hits differently. It becomes one more source of instability in a life that suddenly feels less predictable than it did during working years. Retirement is supposed to bring relief, but for many, it brings a heightened awareness of things that used to feel manageable. The irony is that retirees often have more resources than they think. Their portfolios may be larger than ever. Their expenses may be lower than during peak earning years. Their ability to adjust spending may be greater than they realize. But without a clear structure, those advantages are invisible. All they see is exposure. All they feel is risk. That perception gap is what makes market downturns so difficult. It's not the size of the loss. It's the feeling that there's no buffer, no safety net, no plan for what happens next. And when that feeling takes over, even rational people make defensive choices. They pull back. They avoid risk. They lock in losses that might have recovered if given time. The challenge is that those defensive moves often come at the worst possible moment, after the decline has already happened. When selling means accepting the loss. When moving to cash means missing the recovery. This pattern repeats itself after nearly every major downturn. Retirees who felt confident before the crash feel shaken during it. They make changes they later regret, and they spend years trying to rebuild not just their portfolios, but their confidence. The emotional toll of that cycle is often worse than the financial impact, because even if the money recovers, the sense of security doesn't always come back. This is why market crashes create lasting effects for retirees that go beyond the numbers. They change how people feel about their future. They change how much they trust their plan. They change how much they enjoy retirement. And those changes can linger long after markets have rebounded. The goal of retirement planning is not to eliminate market risk. That's impossible. The goal is to prevent market risk from controlling your emotions and decisions. This requires structure, reliable income for essential expenses, clear understanding of flexible spending, a plan for withdrawals during downturns. When those elements are missing, market crashes feel overwhelming. When they're present, crashes are uncomfortable but survivable. Retirees who feel confident often share one trait. They understand how their income works. They know what must be paid no matter what. They know what can be adjusted temporarily. They know how long their plan can withstand stress. That knowledge doesn't stop markets from falling, but it stops fear from spreading. It allows retirees to experience volatility without letting it dictate every decision. It creates breathing room between what's happening in markets and what's happening in their life. That separation is everything. Because when markets and emotions become too intertwined, every headline feels like a threat. Every correction feels like a crisis. Every recovery feels uncertain. But when there's structure in place, markets can do what they do without disrupting daily life. Volatility becomes an inconvenience, not an emergency. That shift doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional planning. It requires understanding the difference between temporary declines and permanent damage. It requires building a system that protects what matters most, even when markets don't cooperate. In future videos, we'll explain how retirees reduce exposure to sequence risk, how income planning buffers market volatility, and how people regain confidence even after difficult market periods. No fear, no predictions, just clarity. Because market crashes don't hurt retirees more because they're fragile. They hurt more because the stakes are different. Understanding that difference is the first step toward feeling secure again.